And I have the privilege and honor to facilitate the Meth Strike Force here in San Diego County. Before I have the honor to introduce our presenter, I'd like to share with you a little bit about the Meth Strike Force in San Diego County and the good work being done. We often call it MSF, has been here in San Diego County for over 27 years. It is a collaborative initiative involving our public safety partners, anywhere from federal to state to local, our medical and healthcare providers, our prevention specialists, and many, many more, including families and individuals with lived experience. Collectively, we work together to address the issues surrounding SUD and methamphetamine use disorder. So with that, this is a free training that we are offering you through the Neighborhood Safety Work Group. It is a subcommittee of MSF, and we have two individuals that chair that committee. They are with very important partners of ours here in San Diego County. Jovita is with Institute of Public Strategies, and Lisa is with Say San Diego. So a shout out to them and thank them for their consistent leadership in guiding the NSW, our Neighborhood Safety Work Group, and the work they're doing and bringing this training to all of you. I'd also like to say thank you to San Diego Imperial HIDA. With their partnership and their support, we're able to provide these trainings throughout the nation at no charge. Now, without further ado, I get to introduce and have the honor of introducing Scott Silverman. He is a national expert that happens to be here in our backyard in San Diego County. He is the author of two books, The Opioid Epidemic and Tell Me No, I Dare You. I'll have Scott introduce himself more in depth, but welcome and thank you. And we're thrilled that you're here with us today, Scott.
Well, thank you, Marla. It's very exciting to be here. And as you know, I've campaigned and advocated for many, many years to get here. So I feel very grateful and very honored. And for those of you that I can't see, I know you're multitasking right now, and just know that this will be recorded. So hopefully if you hear something you think is informative or excites you or actually pisses you off, we want to hear from you. This is important. This is something that I'm very passionate about. So a little bit about me. Scott H. Silverman is how you can Google me. I am a crisis coach. I am a family navigator. I'm an interventionist. I run a treatment program here in San Diego called Confidential Recovery, specializing with veterans. We're very excited to serve that population. San Diego has the second largest population of veterans in the country, and over half of our veterans do not have insurance, which is amazing because the VA does offer that for them. So we're working very hard to get them into any level of care that makes the most sense. But our specialty is substance use disorders. That's what we focus on. I'm also in long-term recovery, a little over 37 and a half years. And what that means is I haven't had a drink or a drug for 37 and a half years, illicit anyway. Sometimes I take a little prescription medication if I get a tooth pulled, but it's always prescribed and always monitored. I also want to let you know, for those of you, full disclosure, I also am a retired now, unlicensed pharmacist. Let that sink in for a second. And methamphetamine was my product back in the day, coming across Mexico. So I've done some cross-border business for all the wrong reasons, and now today for all the right reasons. I also want to let you know that I'm part of the honorary deputy sheriff, so I work really closely and have always with first responders and law enforcement. Work closely with the criminal justice system. I ran an organization called Second Chance for 18 years. We worked with homeless individuals coming out of jail and prison, and formerly incarcerated. We taught life skills. We had 175 beds on 9 scattered sites, and we did everything around life skills, training, job procurement, job placement, and job retention, and worked very closely with the families to make sure that all the work that we did at the front end really stuck at the back end, if you will. We did nothing in the treatment delivery system. We work with other providers throughout the county. And I want to thank San Diego County, because I've been on a variety of different panels, advisory groups over the few decades, the gang submission, Commission as well. And we, in my opinion, work very hard as a community, and I think are a great model for anywhere in the country. If you're thinking about how do we solve some of the problems we have today, or the issues we have today that are complicated, that are deep-rooted, and unfortunately are systemic, and we need to do something right away. And I'm real excited that we have this platform today, because to me, reducing the stigma, the only way we do that is we talk about it, is we really, really talk about it. Also, I should mention, I do 2 different podcasts. One is Ending the Stigma, and the other one's called Happy Hour. I want to put a little twist on that, because that was the time that I spent most of my hours drinking, was during happy hour. Because drinks were 2 for 1, and they always had all you could eat hors d'oeuvres, which I know some of you get excited about. So that's a little bit about me. I grew up in San Diego. I'm a native. I love it here. And as a border town, we've always experienced unusual things. At one time, we were branded as the methamphetamine capital of the country. That's not true anymore. Thank goodness. And unfortunately, we as a community are experiencing some of the same things I'm sure you are. So I want to start a little bit about the opioid crisis, because I think right now that's probably one of the most glaring top of mind topics, and it seems to be one of the biggest killers right now. But I want to back up first, then I'll go to that. Right now in our country, approximately 15% of our population has an issue with some form of addiction, compulsive obsessive behavior that's taking place. That will erupt in the next 12 months. That's, again, and everything I share with you today is all data driven, all historic, hierarchical. Some of it's going to be anecdotal, experiential from my perspective on interventions and treatment and getting families involved with the recovery process. But all the data that I talk about has come from all the powers to be out of DC, studies that have been done locally, regionally, and statewide. So with that said, 15% of our country, a huge number. What's scary is only 10% of those will seek help. Only 10% of those will seek help. And according to the science, the average person who goes to a 30-day inpatient treatment program, I don't care where it is, I don't care how much it costs, I don't care who pays for it, I don't care how long you stay there. According to science, if they don't have a continuum of care once they leave treatment, if they don't have a plan post-treatment, there's a risk factor of 95% on the relapse side, 95%. So when you think about the industry of treatment, it's roughly a $40 billion industry and has a 95% failure rate. Not the treatment industry itself, if you will, but technically, if we as providers are providing the treatment and our outcomes depict that, then we have to take some responsibility that clearly the model may not be working. And this data, by the way, I've been in recovery 37 years. I've been hearing these numbers for decades. So things are not improving. Are we making improvements? Absolutely. We'll talk a little bit about harm reduction in a few minutes. We'll talk about MAT, medication-assisted treatment. We'll talk about awareness. We'll talk about criminal justice, raising the bar and how they're dealing with the process that are going on. But the opioid crisis right now, 300 people a day are dying behind opioids, 300 a day that we know of. And this data, unfortunately, when I sit in our meetings with the task force, the information we're getting is coming from the medical examiner. So we know it's got to be honest and true. I mean, it's the science. When they do the autopsies, they gather the data and they share that with those who are in the room, criminal justice, the first responders, the treatment providers, the community advocates, the educators, the scientists, the doctors. So we know the data is real. And we unfortunately have experienced, hundreds of % increase in overdoses. I don't even want to share the number because it's scary, but I know it goes across the board. There aren't any communities that I've heard of right now that have been able to develop a model to slow down this overdose. A big part of it is the counterfeit medication that we're seeing in the drugs. Right now, there was a DA recently in our state of California that shared 80% of the illicit drugs are laced with fentanyl. And when you hear in the news and you read about it and you hear about the overdoses, you realize that this is catastrophic. Or right now, I understand, I heard the data point yesterday that COVID is still killing 300 people a day. Well, we're a little bit north of that right now with the opioid overdose. CDC just released numbers again from last year, over 107,000 people. And those are the ones we know about. And I say that because a lot of times people will have polydrugs in their system. And when they do the autopsy, if that isn't the larger percentage, it may be jotted down as methamphetamine. It might have been an alcohol overdose. It might have been a prescription medication mixed with alcohol and other illicit drugs. So at the end of the day, this is out of control. And, you know, it's one of those things you can't just say to your kids, hey, you got to stop doing that. I remember when I was in the midst of my using, I would hear that from people that care about me, and I just laughed. There was an interview recently with a woman in Skid Row in Los Angeles, and the interviewer said, aren't you concerned about the fentanyl on the street? She says, oh, I've been using drugs so long, I'm immune to it. It won't bother me. I mean, that kind of attitude, you know, she was about 50, is a real issue. A quick story. A friend of mine has a good friend that hadn't been to a concert in a decade. Recently back in Connecticut, and she was going to see a band she hadn't seen in a long time. She decided she wanted to do some cocaine because she hadn't done it in a long time to get ready for the concert. Had her shirt on and everything. Was telling me the story. Turned out the cocaine she had was laced with fentanyl. She never left the house. She died right there in her bed. And these are the kind of stories that, you know, those of us who are in the field, and I'm sure a lot of you are as well, we're hearing this on a daily basis. And we're not going to see the solutions, in my opinion, coming from the federal government. I mean, SAMHSA just launched an announcement of $1.5 billion. $1.5 billion on a national level for a crisis like this. By the time the money gets to California and San Diego, we'll see about $175, you know, and we need to make this as important as having a good breakfast every day. I think that's my opinion. That's the way I look at things. So I'm going to take a deep breath and let Marla ask a quick question. Go ahead, Marla.
So, Scott, thank you very much. You, as an expert, you were able to tell us and define the problem. After identifying the problem, what are the challenges do you see and do we all face with this epidemic?
Well, first and foremost, the 18 to 50-year-olds study just came out last year. Opioids are killing, is the #1 killer of 18 to 50-year-olds. So how do we educate? I mean, now, if somebody who's 30, 40, 50 years old, been at it a little while, they probably are going to look at things from a mindset differently. But young people that are going to a party, that are taking a pill that's given to them by a friend, and they're dying. Fentanyl is poison. So as a interventionist and a crisis coach and a family navigator, what I tell families is this. You need to sit with your young people and you need to listen. You need to hear what's going on in their world. Be curious, but maybe before you sit down, go online, get some information and find out what solutions are out there. I mean, I'm the kind of guy that nobody invites to go on a long trip in a motorhome because my subject matter can be a bit of a downer. But the solution, in my opinion, is going to be communication. It's going to be walking along the side of a child. It's not going to be talking down to them. It's not going to be sharing information that gets them scared. Scared Straight was studied, didn't really have the kind of outcomes that everyone thought they would have, nor did, just say no to drugs. Most people who are excited, most people who are experimenting, when you tell them no, I wrote a whole book about it, Tell Me No, I Dare You, back in 2008. They're not going to embrace that kind of concept. So how do you do it? You sit and you listen. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. And for those of you that know me, I have 2 mouths and 3 ears. So I try to do as much listening as I can, but I also encourage families. And I want to be clear, in my opinion, addiction is a disease. The disease of addiction. It's just like diabetes. Nobody raises their hand and says, hey, Mom, Dad, can I have an addiction when I grow up? It doesn't work that way. You're either wired for it, you're predisposed, or over time, if you're abusing something long enough, you're going to get addicted to it. And it's just like, think about chocolate for a second, or coffee. And those things are something we see everywhere. And those aren't necessarily drugs, but it's easy to get addicted to those kind of food particles, if you will, because they just hit the brain in a certain way. And the dopamine gets fired up and that gets somebody going. And if you're predisposed, you're going to want more, and you're going to want more, and you're going to want more. Marla, does that answer your question in a brief way?
Absolutely. We do have a question from one of the participants. And the question is, could you please repeat the percent of illicit substances that are laced in fentanyl?
According to one of the
Fentanyl, excuse me.
with fentanyl, one of the DAs, I don't remember their name, in California, shared in an article about 2.5, 3 months ago. You probably can Google it. That 80% of the illicit drugs in California, and I'm assuming that they're being tested upon arrest or upon information coming from the medical examiner officer. 80% are laced. They're finding today are laced with fentanyl, some level of fentanyl.
Wow.
So
Okay.
that answers
Thank
that
you.
question. Right. That's a
Perfect.
scary number when you think about it, because the seizures are way up. I think the criminal justice system is doing a wonderful job, but they're overwhelmed. And first responders and the border patrol, I mean, everyone who's working the borders, but most people that are getting access to fentanyl, most can make it themselves. You can go on the dark web. And I'm not trying to give anybody any ideas out there, because I know some of you are thinking, hey, that's a great idea. They go on the dark web, they can order the products they need, the ingredients, they can have it shipped to them USPS to their home or to a PO box, and then they can make fentanyl in their garage. A $5,000 investment will turn a $2 million retail sale if you know what you're doing. And even if you don't know what you're doing, you can go on the dark web to get the information. I don't think there's YouTube videos on it, but my sense is there are strategic distributors out there who are really trying hard to get their product in the United States, because we're a big consumer. So think about that for a second. We're their biggest consumer, whether it's China, Mexico, or just individuals that want to make their own crops, if you will, in their own backyard.
Perfect. Thank you. And we encourage other participants to ask questions. And Scott really thrives off of that opportunity to be interactive. A little difficult to do in a virtual format, we understand, and in a webinar, but you are welcome to put your questions within chat or the QA section, and we'll do our best to get those questions over to Scott. So Scott, you have eloquently kind of defined the problem. You've highlighted the challenges, and I think many people on this training see it and will agree with you, whether it's here in San Diego County or within the community that they work and live and serve. So I think the value of any training is leaning into the component of what are solutions, what is intervention, what can communities do, what can families do? And so I want to make sure we give you enough time to lean into this topic, the solutions, the intervention, the help.
Okay. And before I answer that, I want to make sure that I don't miss any category. Legalized marijuana has created all kinds of interesting situations. We're seeing it now in schools. People are vaping marijuana. Fentanyl is being ingested with marijuana. It's being laced, if you will. So when you think about it, alcohol seems to be, in some cases, on a downturn, if you will, from a consumption level from young people, which is great. But if they're swinging to other drugs or illicit drugs or prescription medication that they're potentially taking from their parents, that has to be looked at as well. And there's other addictions out there. Whenever I speak about there's always somebody who pokes up and says, why didn't you mention this? But I'm not trying to exclude anything. But I also know that, we only have a limited amount of time, and my number, my contact information is on the screen. So if you have some follow-up thoughts or ideas or suggestions, as Marla said, the reason I like taking questions is I want to know what's going on in your community. I want to know what you think, or how I can help, if you will, or how we can help move the needle. Because if we don't create some path to systemic change, we're going to be sitting here in 3 years, and that number of 300 a day is going to be 1,000 a day or 1,200 a day. So let's get a couple things straight. Again, I believe it's a disease. I also know, and science has studied, it's a family disease. So if it's a family of 4, there's 2 kids, 2 parents, intact family, if you will, whatever that's defined as, they are impacted by this disease. And in many cases, if they suffered from this disease, it can be hereditary. Some people argue that. But at the end of the day, if it's a learned behavior, if children are growing up watching their parents party or drink a lot, and dad's taking a pill to wake up in the morning and mom's taking one to go to sleep at night, then that's a learned behavior, and children are going to emulate that. And if of the 2 kids, if one is older, the youngest one usually wants to be like their bigger brother or older sister. We had a situation just recently, about a year ago, where a younger sibling wanted to be like his brother. There was a party the night before, a Skittles party, one of those parties where pills are put in a bowl and everyone grabs a pill at a certain time of the night, unbeknownst to them what they're taking. Well, the next day, there was some left over. The little brother wanted to be like his big brother. He took a pill, an opiate laced with fentanyl, and he overdosed and died. These are the kind of accidents that we have to find ways to prevent. And it's really, how do you tell a 12-year-old, listen, you don't go get a pill off the table after your brother's party? That is something that we're going to have to back up a few steps, walk it back a little bit, and start talking about it. So as a family disease, we have to understand, what does that really mean? So in order to do that, you have to do some research, you have to do some homework, you have to do some deeper dives and make sure that you as the parent or the guardian or the head of the household is informed enough to be able to have an intelligent conversation, or be smart enough to say to your youngster, you know, I hear this stuff going on in schools today. Would you tell me about it? And they're like, I'm not going to tell you. Come on. I want to be educated. I want to support you because I love you. And it scares me when I hear these stories. Share that with your child and listen to what they have to say. I assure you, that will prompt something in the next steps. And the fact that you're curious about it, they might talk to you about it. So being punitive, threatening, the shame-based finger of shame, that's not going to move anywhere. So as a family, talk about it. A colleague of mine traveled the world with as the United Nations drug czar, local in San Diego psychiatrist, Igor. Some of you, I'm sure, know him. And his job was to study treatment modalities around the world. And he came back and I was asking him, he goes, well, culturally, some countries do certain things. You know, opioids are big in one part of the world, other parts of the world. But he was at the ribbon cutting. I think it was in, I want to say, China, the first clinic for heroin addicts. And he was telling me that he says, basically, Scott, the studies have shown the best preventive tool we can have as families is having dinner 3 nights a week, talking to each other, putting your phones down and just talking to each other. How was your day? You know, no kid wants to hear, you know, how's your homework going? But to simply maybe just be quiet and let them start the conversation. And if they don't, nudge them in a loving way. Because that kind of conversation creates the camaraderie, develops the social model, opens the line of communication, and more importantly, creates the path of trust. Because your kids aren't going to tell you what they're partying, how they're partying, and what their friends are doing. But at some point, they may get to a point where they're concerned themselves because they're watching their friends die. Right now, according to the data, 1 in 5 families have an individual right now that's suffering from some form of addiction, or potentially some mental health issues that are, if you will, kind of feeding the addiction itself. And of course, with COVID the last couple of years, we have things going on in our communities that we've never, ever seen before. So there is no science yet of what to do best to move that needle forward. Go ahead, Mark.
We've had a couple questions come in, and I want to make sure we answer them in a timely manner. The first question from one of our participants is, once the brain becomes accustomed to the opioids, how does the craving affect recovery, and how do we address the cravings? Is the first question.
Treatment. I mean, once the brain has been triggered and the high is there, if you will, or the mood altering substance, you know, helps somebody feel better or perceive that they're feeling better once they're self-medicating. And I'm not, by the way, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a therapist, not a clinician. You saw my list of what I am, but I'm not one of those. And I always defer to, you know, the experts. But at the end of the day, once somebody has an active addiction, it really is going to require an entree into, whether it be a detox program, an outpatient program, which is what we run at Confidential, a long-term residential program, and therapy, and working with the social model, and of course MAT, harm reduction, which is simply, you know, an individual who, especially with opioids, has an opportunity to take medication that can help them, if you will, decompress and detox off of and move away from that addiction and that dependency and transform. But it takes weeks, months, and years to do all of that. But the intervention piece is really, how do we educate that family when it's time to be able to say to Junior, hey, we love you. We care about you. And we're not going to go to your funeral. That's not easy to do. So you really have to prepare as a family, because once an individual is actively self-medicating on a regular basis and it's clear cut that there's an addiction issue involved, you've got to go to the experts. They've got to help you, and they've got to help them as well. But it's important that when that person gets into treatment, you as a family member is also sourcing and getting involved to learn what you can do in your role. An interesting study I heard a couple of years ago from one of the nationally well-recognized interventionists is 75% of relapse can be triggered by the family, meaning if the person who has the addiction gets help and they're starting to transform and change, but the family members, the influencers, the ones that the kids look up to, are saying the same thing and expecting different results, which is one of the clear definitions of insanity, they can trigger that. For example, why aren't you going back to work? What happened with school? And this individual just getting sober, if you will, and just trying to detox off of something that's taken their brain hostage is going to take time, and it takes patience. I mean, I get calls almost every week. Why won't they stop? I tell them every day. Well, that doesn't work, unfortunately.
Well, we have a couple more questions, and one kind of builds off of what you were talking about, and you briefly mentioned. Can you go into the intervention or the treatment of MAT, medicated assisted treatment, and how that helps not only the individual, but how MAT, when the family can come in and learn more about it and the value of it?
Well, MAT, medication-assisted treatment, it has been around for a long time, but a lot of treatment programs over the years are abstinence-based, meaning they won't even allow, they're starting to now, and of course, county-funded programs are mandated to do it now, but that was just recently, just in the last 2 years, because somebody who's trying to get off of heroin or Oxycontin or even fentanyl, if you will, to just say to somebody, okay, we're going to put you in treatment, you're just going to stop doing it because it's not going to be accessible to you. Well, most people who suffer from this disease, they will find a way, because their body, mind, and soul, their job every day was to try to get something to make themselves feel better. The family's job is to try to find a way to intervene on that. And the treatment modalities have the science, hopefully, and the tools to provide the template and, if you will, the portals and the platform to share the information. They have the clinical experts that are working the groups. They have the psychiatrists that are talking with the clients. And if somebody needs medication to help them wean off of the addiction and step down, if you will, MATs become a big way to do that. Now, that happens with different medications. There's some for alcohol, but let's use methamphetamine as an example. There is no real pill, if you will, to help somebody. It almost has to be cold turkey and supported. There are anti-anxiety and sleep medications and things that are given in an inpatient program, but in an outpatient program, unless you're seeing a doctor on the in conjunction with your treatment, you're not accessing that treatment. So it can be difficult. And a lot of times I hear this from people that are in recovery. They go, well, I just made a decision to get off of drugs. I don't want to take a drug. Well, if that medication helps you get off and stay off, why not do that?
Thank you very much. We have two more questions, and I really appreciate this interactive part of the presentation, because it's an opportunity to kind of lean into your expertise. The first question of the two that I will ask you involves our high schoolers. How do these statistics being presented to the high schoolers? 80% potential fentanyl is scary to anyone. So how is that language used within our younger population?
It's a real dilemma in the schools, in my opinion, because when schools talk about these kind of things, they're concerned that the information that they're sharing, we all know somebody, I won't mention his name and embarrass him unless I have to, first name's Rocky, got into the schools and tried for years. It's really difficult to get into the schools and talk about these kind of things, because if it's not delivered in a positive way, it sometimes offers kids ideas and tips and tricks. So the thinking is, well, we just won't talk about it. Well, we're at a point now, we're losing too many children. We have no choice. I know the conversation around, opioid reversing medication, trying to get into schools has been a real struggle, just because schooling was different with COVID, but still we have to encourage children and teachers and educators, and we have to put this into it, because if we don't, they're going to go to that party. They're going to go to that prom. You know, we have prom season coming up now. I only know that because I heard it on the news. My kids are older. And we're going to see a lot of overdoses, in my opinion, because it's not going to just change overnight. You cannot flip the switch. It's a process. Creating systemic change takes time. And I think it has to be part of the curriculum. But, you know, I have a new acronym that I'm creating for my, new YouTube channel launching. It's called PIE: Prevent, Inform, and Educate. We have to prevent, we have to inform, and we have to educate. And I know teachers are busy, and I know they're overwhelmed, and I know they don't have time right now to sharpen a pencil. They're so busy. But if we don't get this in the schools and we don't get the families supporting it, and I think part of what families think is, well, the schools are doing it. And the schools believe, well, the family should be doing it. Well, we have to be doing it together. This isn't a one, off where you do this and we do that. If we as a community are making this as much a part of the conversation as stopping at a red light when you learn to drive, or green for go, because nobody would get behind the wheel of a car under the influence, if you will, or I'm sorry, no one would get behind the wheel of a car in the dark, in the rain, with their lights off. So why are we approaching this topic in a way where someone's going to tell them? It's kind of like the mom and dad who's going to have that talk with our kid. Neither one of them do it. And all of a sudden somebody's, gotten into trouble because they didn't have the information. So having the conversation is important. But if I were a parent, I wouldn't depend on the school. And if I was in the school, I wouldn't depend on the parent. So that's all I can do, is hopefully raise awareness. And we have to have the conversations. And how are we putting it into the curriculum? How is the conversation going? And putting up a poster in the cafeteria does not waive the responsibility of the people who have influence on our children throughout the day and week and month and year.
Good, thank you. More questions are coming in, Scott. And my next question from one of the participants is, why would drug dealers lace other drugs with fentanyl, which is expensive compared to meth?
That is such a great question, and it's interesting. The answer, and I'm a social entrepreneur, so I understand, how do you build, how do you leverage, how do you fundraise, how do you build capacity, how do you help more people? When, and I got this direct story from somebody in law enforcement who interviewed somebody who was responsible for distributing a lot of drugs in our community. And they wasn't just methamphetamine. They had Oxycontin, they had Xanax, they had methamphetamine. The answer to that question from the distributor's perspective is, anytime somebody overdoses and dies and it hits the news, their business spikes. So it's like promotion for them. So when you think about it, as a drug distributor, they don't care. They're selling poison. It doesn't matter to them, because the more people that get addicted to their product. I mean, and let's just use methamphetamine, for example. 10 years ago, a pound of methamphetamine was roughly $11,000 and it had about a 10 to 11% methamphetamine infused in it. Today, that same pound is around $1,200 and is 85 to 90% pure. I understand a story that I heard from a very good, reliable source a few months back, that distributors in Los Angeles are fronting large quantities of methamphetamine to people they kind of know without any money, because the law of averages, they're not only going to make their money back, but that distributor is going to get more people addicted, or give them opportunities to become addicted, and will need more products. So when they come back, they charge them for the first batch and the second batch. So when I think about drug distributors, as a prior unlicensed pharmacist, I know the mindset. I mean, I can remember when I was selling methamphetamine, and for those of you, it's in my book, so it's not a piece of information I'm just bringing up. My family knows, so if you want to call my wife, she'll tell, yeah, we all knew that, because we were married my last 2 years of my drinking and using. So she's got some really good history of what it's like and what it's like now. I was worried about my competition, because back in those days, there was other stuff around the street. So today, the purity of the drug and the costs are so much lower. And think about this. Imagine people from China and Mexico, every business industry, we all have it. We go to these conferences. I'm sure they don't have them, but who knows? Maybe they're sitting on somebody's yacht out in the middle of, I don't know, Puerto Vallarta, and they're talking strategy, and they're talking market share, and they're talking regional distribution. Why wouldn't they? I mean, when the super labs started producing methamphetamine at a rate no one's ever seen before, when fentanyl came in, that cartel, well, wait, what is this? Well, how do we get a piece of this? That's the way it works. I mean, the Crips and the Bloods got together. When I was in the gang commission, we learned this back in the 90s. They got together in Los Angeles for the first time ever to work together on human trafficking. And the reason was there was so much money to be made and there was no reason to fight about it. So this is the mindset of the people that are poisoning our children. So know that if that's I call it my competition, but I think of them as the enemy. But if I think of them as my competition, I think I can strategize differently with our treatment team. I can talk about it differently in the community, because when I go to meetings, Marla's meetings, Sarah's meetings, there's a lot of people in criminal justice sitting in the room. There's a lot of people that are in the education side of what happens, but the treatment providers are kind of few and far between. And without treatment, none of this is going to get better. And I think treatment and accessing treatment is so important that if we don't make that part of the solution in every conversation, because all the data that I've shared today, all the information that all of you have, you read the same newspapers or news channels I do. You hear the same unfortunate outcomes that we're seeing with our young family members. What are we going to do differently? Because if we're the thought leaders, if we're the change agents, if we're the influencers, we have to let the county know, hey, this is what the teachers are telling us. I mean, I can't tell you how many, I was complaining to Mara last year, how many meetings I'm going to. And I know the task force are trying to find a way to create a hybrid, because we're all seeing each other, every other month now at different, marijuana task force is thinking, the opioid task force, the methamphetamine task force, the marijuana task force, and then the task force to maintain the management of the task force. And unfortunately, municipalities are, they have to do their due diligence. They only get a certain amount of money, and they're doing as much as they can, moving as fast as they can, getting information out. But, the information highways, in my opinion, today are kind of clogged, and we have to find a different way to share this information with kids.
Thank you, Scott. Additional questions. One from a valued colleague within our county states, my understanding is that according to the CDC, over 80% overdose deaths due to illicit substances were caused by opioids, but not that opioids or fentanyl specifically is found in 80% of illicit substances.
So I'm sorry, what was that? I don't understand that question. Was that a question?
Do you agree with that statement? It's more of a statement that according to the CDC, 80% of overdose deaths due to illicit substances were caused by opioids, but not that opioids or fentanyl specifically is found in 80% of the illicit substances. That meth, what I'm hearing it is methamphetamine is still very, very prevalent. That opioids is causing the deaths, but methamphetamine, that's how I'm interpreting. What is your response?
I think the morbidity rate with opioids is accelerated to such a degree it's taken a priority. Methamphetamine, it's interesting. People seem to be able to do methamphetamine and live longer, but if you get fentanyl laced in something, the probability of you expiring from that experimentation or an accidental overdose is so much higher. And the last part, I think, of that statement, it was a DA in California, and I think they probably got the information from the medical examiners across the state, said that 80% of the illicit drugs that they're seeing are laced with fentanyl. And the problem with fentanyl is it's generally not prescribed. And if it is, it's very, unique, usually in hospital settings. So if it's street made, who knows what they're cutting it with? And if somebody is getting a hold of a drug, let's say Xanax, out of someone's medicine cabinet, and it's laced with, they take and lace it with fentanyl, or they use the Xanax as a label, because you can buy pill makers online at Amazon, and you make your pills look like something else, and it's called counterfeit medication, and someone's taking what they think is a Xanax, but it's actually cut with fentanyl, and they're overdosing. there's the problem. And that's where we really, there was a homeless man interviewed by our local newspaper about 6 months ago. And he says it, openly, I'm addicted to methamphetamine. I love methamphetamine. I've been a methamphetamine user for years. He goes, I'm concerned, though, that the methamphetamine I'm getting today might be laced with fentanyl. So he got a hold of fentanyl test strips, and he's testing his own street drugs now to make sure, because he goes, I don't want to die getting high. I mean, think about that. I don't want to die getting high.
Thank you. Well, we leaned into your presentation with your expertise in regarding recovery and interventions. And so with that topic of recovery, we have a question regarding marijuana. So how do we educate clients about issues regarding regular and intense use of marijuana? What are some of the problems that can occur? Would a person require in-person treatment to discontinue the use of this marijuana? And what are some of the side effects of regular intensive use of marijuana?
Well, marijuana has become such an interesting topic because it's legal now in California. And, it's interesting. A couple of months ago, I guess the governor is getting petitioned right now by not all, but most of the marijuana distributors and retailers, because they're concerned with their heavy tax that they have to pay, that they're losing market share because the illicit marijuana drug growers are distributing and selling marijuana for a lot lower price. I'm 68. I know, Marla, you think I'm younger. That's okay. When I was smoking marijuana, the THC content was 3, 4, 5, 6% tops. The marijuana that we're seeing now, whether it be in a retail store or grown illicitly, is north of 90% THC, can be found as high as 90%. So if someone's predisposed, a medication like that or a mood altering substance like that can become addictive very quickly. I mean, we see people that come in and maybe their alcohol is their primary drug of choice, DOC they call it, but marijuana is something that they casually do. And they do it, at a point where they think it's important. And now with edibles and other opportunities for people to get a hold of it, people are taking it. And, Colorado, excuse me, which was, one of the pioneers with legalizing marijuana, has nothing but problems with it right now because the content of THC is so high. So when you're smoking marijuana, it's not like, they say it's not like your dad's marijuana. It's so different. It's so intense. And the THC content is so high. It's highly addictive right now. And people are vaping with it. So the fentanyl distributors are now encouraging marijuana distributors to lace their marijuana with fentanyl. So that is the problem that I'm seeing reoccurring everywhere. And methamphetamine, same thing. But generally speaking, somebody who is taking a stimulant does not necessarily want the opioid until maybe at the end of the day, if you will. And, with all the information that's come across the last couple of years with Oxycontin, the Purdue family, and what was happening with Big Pharma, and the prescription medication. I mean, 2016, 270 million prescriptions of Oxycontin were written in this country. And according to, anecdotal experiential science, if you will, if you call it that, 60% of those medications or prescriptions sit in somebody's medicine cabinet. So if you've got that in your medicine cabinet today and you have grandchildren or you have nieces and nephews that come to visit, there's proper ways to dispose of that. And that's one of the things the task force does. And Safe Homes Coalition is a nonprofit that I run to help educate families on disposal of unsafe and unused medication. So marijuana, and I'm one of those kind of people, when I talk to families, I mean, they're almost all allowing the marijuana to be smoked because they want their kid to give up the opioid. And I get that. And we see people come to treatment, they go, I'll give up alcohol, but I won't give up marijuana. And most of those people, if they say that at a point of entry for treatment, the treatment provider is going to say, look, you're not ready. Our attitude is I'd rather get them in the room, start to work with them on a path to abstinence rather than reject them as a candidate if we can find a way to get them motivated. Because if they're asking for help, by the way, the 3 hardest words in the English language, I need help, then we must give them an opportunity. And, I belong to an anonymous program that doesn't even want to talk about it. It tells people all the time, you're not ready, go back out. You've only got 2 DUIs. You didn't kill anybody yet. You're not motivated. And I'm oversimplifying it. And I know I'll get in trouble for saying that, but I think part of the anonymity, in my opinion, prevents some people who really need medication from getting medication, and I can't tell you, somebody will call me and they'll say, look, I have a family member who's been taking pain medication for the last 10 years and they can't get it anymore. They're talking about going out and getting heroin. What do I do? It's a tough one. It's a tough one. And marijuana, they're being talked about now. I know the VA's discussed it with, with veterans trying to get them off of opioids and using marijuana as a substitute or a replacement drug. And I got to tell you, I'm not really confident that's going to do the job, but I'm not a scientist. But I got to tell you, if somebody says to me, look, I'm taking edibles every night, and I finally can sleep and I'm not in pain and they're able to function and they're a mature adult and they're informed, I say, if that's what you need to do, you feel you need to do, but just make sure you're talking to a doctor. So at least they're checking your blood work and making sure that all the other vital signs are working as well.
Well, thank you, Scott. We don't have any more questions from the participants, and we're nearing the end of our time. So any last words or thoughts in regards to promoting recovery, promoting that recovery is possible, that treatment is available, that intervention works? So any last words?
Sure. First and foremost, thank you all for listening today. And I hope there's something here, a nugget that triggered something. If nothing else, my contact information is there. Please call me anytime, day or night. I do a lot of news media and I always give out my phone number. And I'm always excited when I see a strange number in my phone, because to me, it's a chance to save a life. And by the way, 10 years ago, when I got in the treatment business, it was not on my radar prior to that. And I started working with first responders because they were a group of people that it didn't seem like were getting the kind of support they needed for the work they do. And there's a lot of stress. And look, according to their own data, 25% of first responders have an active addiction. The only group that's actually higher and they're reported is lawyers. And that came from the National Bar Association, and that they're north of 30%, mostly around alcohol. So the issues are out there, and I think we need to just start talking about them. So a couple of things I want to just share. We really need to get opioid reversing drugs in the schools. We really do. And I know there's a new one coming out very soon, and I hope that we're going to see that company maybe help to promote and work. Others have been out there as well, and naloxone's the drug that's in there. And I think that we need to allow ourselves to get a little bit out of our comfort zone and be a little uncomfortable knowing that there might be a perceived threat in sharing this information. But I think the other side of it, of not sharing it or not taking time or not earmarking resources is worse, because we're going to see a wave of mental health issues like we've never seen before. A lot of it because our world changed with the pandemic. And now there's threats of more of it coming. And thank God for Zoom. I don't know how I would be communicating with people. And I'm at an age where I'm a higher risk, but I've got my boosters, but still I'm real concerned about it. So having that opportunity to reverse the overdose is so critical, and to have the conversation. Secondly, being able to, as a family, take a deep breath, get online, get educated, and know that this is going to be a family issue, and the family is going to help solve this problem. Don't wait for the schools, and schools don't wait for the parents. And criminal justice, what a job you have. What a job you have. And you can only do so much. But at the end of the day, as the first responder, having these kind of tools in your toolbox, if nothing else in your memory base, when you get to a situation, you might be able to see that there is hope and there is help. Thirdly, make a phone call, ask for help. Don't try to love your child to wellness without the right tools. When your car breaks down, you don't pull off on the freeway, pull up your phone, flip up a YouTube and how to fix a stalled car. You usually call AAA or you call your mechanic. make a phone call. This disease is not your fault. This disease is not your child's fault. And if they're acting in an unusual way, if their behavior shifted, weight loss, weight gain, new friends at home, you're missing a Rolex at home, it's not their fault. Yes, the action may have been taken by them, but if they are under the influence of something mood altering, and if you understand that and you are sensitive to it, you might be able to approach it in a way where you can have a different kind of conversation. Because if the family doesn't shift, the individual with the problem's not going to, because they think everything is fine. Keep in mind, it's a disease of denial. It's a disease of the inability to feel feelings, and it's not their fault.
Thank you, Scott. And thank you for all who have participated and attended this training. I want to thank you, Scott, for eliminating the stigma, for really identifying the disease of addiction, and highlighting that treatment is available and recovery is possible. For all of you that have participated, we will put an evaluation in the chat, and we ask you and encourage you to complete that evaluation. Also wanted to share some tools for you. On our Meth Strike Force website, which is no2meth.org, and it's the number 2, meth.org, you will find the Meth 360 toolkit, information that you can provide and share within your communities and do presentations with. And coming soon on the Prescription Drug Abuse Task Force website, which is sdpdatf.org, again, sdpdatf.org, we will be posting the fentanyl toolkit with videos, social media clips, PowerPoints, and training opportunities to provide to your communities, your schools, and for families. So I encourage you to look into those 2 resources. Again, thank you, Scott, for being a partner, not only here in San Diego, but for the country. And this presentation was recorded, and you will be able to find it on the MSF website, no2meth.org. Thank you all, and have a good day. Be safe.